I love so many things about North Dakota, and one of the things I love the best is how anxious we are to help one another. You see it all the time. You've seen the traffic jams at entryways when you're trying to go into a restaurant or a building as people stop to hold the doors open for one another. If you've ever stopped alongside one of our roads to take a picture or a phone call or to change a tire, you've probably had multiple people stop just to make sure you don't need any help. Another way North Dakotans can show kindness to their neighbors is by getting vaccinated. Vaccinations keep vulnerable people safe from severe illness and death. They keep our economy running by keeping our businesses open. They help us stay mentally healthy by allowing us to connect with others through church events or community groups. They also keep our healthcare workers safe and on the job. Getting vaccinated is a choice you can make to help your neighbors, your community, and your state. So talk to your doctor about it and follow their advice to get the vaccinations that will help keep you and all the people you care about healthy and happy. To learn more, go to spreadlovenotcovidnd.org, a website set up by the North Dakota State University Center for Immunization Research and Education.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome to Plain Talk. And hey, whenever the legislature's in session, there's all sorts of issues that get discussed. And a lot of times we think about, taxes and education, a lot of those top issues. Sometimes what kind of maybe surprisingly becomes an important issue are some smaller things. I'm talking specifically about House Bill 1151, which was introduced by somebody who was just recently on the show talking about another issue, Representative Paul Thomas, a Republican from Velva. And this bill is, well, it's short. A lot of legislative bills can run on for pages and pages and be very complicated. This bill contains exactly one sentence. It says, the department, referring to the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, the department may not issue rules or adopt a policy or practice prohibiting the baiting of deer for lawful hunting. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, here to talk with me about it is a wildlife veterinarian from the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, Dr. Charlie Bonson. And Dr. Bonson, first of all, why... I mean, before we get into the bill, why is it important, or why has the Game and Fish Department tried to regulate deer baiting in the past? Like, what's the goal? What's the point?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a long answer. Listeners might be familiar that kind of our stance on baiting popped up about 10 years ago when there was a bovine tuberculosis outbreak in Minnesota. And at that time, we had some cattle producers in the northeast part of the state that were pretty concerned about, tuberculosis getting into deer. And other states, Minnesota and Michigan, have really found that baiting and feeding very much contributes to transmission of that disease among deer. And so at the time, there was a bill that would have restricted baiting statewide. From a disease perspective, that was would have been a pretty proactive thing to do. Our department did support that, because of disease and some other concerns, but that bill failed. And at the time it was, strongly indicated to the department that, look, this is a tool that you guys have, but you need to only use it when there's an established disease risk. So fast forward 10 years later, when we started to, I guess shortly thereafter, we started to find chronic wasting disease, which we'll probably talk about a bit, but like bovine tuberculosis, very much a concern for deer, and pretty well established that baiting and feeding increases transmission. So now we use restricting that practice as a tool to try to slow down how fast the disease spreads. We've had chronic wasting disease in the south central part of the state since that 2009 time. And then about 10 years later, we started finding it in the northwest part of the state in 2018, first Divide County, and unfortunately a number of counties afterwards. And so when we find CWD in an area, we restrict baiting in any hunting unit that falls within 25 miles of that detection. And so now it is about half the hunting units, primarily in the west, but also Unit 2B along the Red River. That's done as a way to try to slow down how fast this really important disease spreads within our deer herds.
Now, Dr. Bonson, this is Ben Hansen here. I did wonder, Representative Thomas, rather, has said there's a distinction between the sorts of diseases that your department is trying to prevent against, and that baiting here in his region up in north central North Dakota, going up to the Canadian border, doesn't currently have the spread of this specific disease. There's a distinction between the blue tongue, and I don't know them, and you do. But what do you have to say to that, to the Prime Bill sponsors' explanation that this bill wouldn't impact the disease spread there?
I guess I would probably push back on that pretty strongly. We actually Manitoba, so pretty much straight north of that area, has found a number of cases right across the border. We've also found it in hunting units 3A1 and 3A2. And based off of the epidemiology around it, it's pretty easy to know that the disease is there, and it's in very low prevalence, meaning, one out of many, many deer, probably less than 1% currently have that disease, chronic wasting disease. And we really want to keep it that way. But in order to do that, we look at what we know about the disease. It's transmitted among animals, but also indirectly by consuming bodily fluids. And we then look at what practices within our control as hunters amplify those sorts of high risk interactions. And it's pretty demonstrably evident that baiting and feeding do that. So, there's a little bit of discussion about baiting versus feeding. It might be kind of semantics. Our department doesn't have authority to restrict feeding, but baiting is a practice that, a portion of hunters do throughout, much of the late summer and fall. And that's a pretty substantial amount of risk that, is just, we can't justify given the clear risks that the disease presents once it's, documented in an area. So, I would kind of, I would kind of push back on that. I would say that there are other diseases, blue tongue, EHD, which are kind of synonymous. It's this really rapid acting viral disease that's transmitted by a midge. And you're right to say that, baiting probably doesn't contribute to that disease system in a substantial way. But when we're talking about these chronic wasting disease, which is transmitted through bodily fluids and the consumption thereof, it's quite evident that baiting is going to contribute, voluntary risk to transmission.
I guess one problem I have with this bill is on one hand, like if you believe in hunting, and I do, I grew up hunting. If you believe in its cultural importance and everything like that, that tradition, then we should want to protect our herd populations, and not just deer, but elk and moose and all the other animals that can be affected. Not and by the way, this isn't just necessarily about chronic wasting disease, which I understand that people that's kind of the focus of this at the moment. But as you just alluded to, there are other types of diseases that could potentially be spread through baiting. And so I don't know. It seems like being able to restrict baiting when appropriate is an important tool for North Dakota Game and Fish to have. I guess, can you help us understand how prevalent is deer baiting? How many people do it? I've had it characterized to me, I don't know if this is accurate, that there's landowners that do it because they make money by selling, or selling access to their land or whatever, and so they bait their land so that deer can come. Is that what's happening? How prevalent is this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have specific numbers in front of me that address that. I will say that baiting is fairly common among a segment, particularly of archery hunters. You're also right that there's outfitters in portions of the state that probably use that as a tool to, make success a little more guaranteed for their clients. Among kind of the standard rifle hunters that hunt for 16 days a year, I don't think it is terribly common, but But it's a pretty well entrenched practice among a portion of our hunting public, and I don't mean to paint over that. I think if it's been a part of how you hunt for quite a long time, like we don't take lightly the fact that we're asking you to change how you do things, but some of the wording you used earlier is important to keep in mind. Like we are, as the agency, as the department, we're charged with protecting hunting opportunity today, but also well into the future. And we're also charged with doing that in a science-based manner. And the kind of vast body of science around CWD, around the transmission thereof, points to baiting as being a thing that contributes to spreading that disease faster. So yeah, I think it. I mean, obviously, it's one of a few pretty blunt tools that we have to combat CWD, and we really hope to be able to keep having this tool. As we alluded to from the beginning of the talk, this tool is available for us to combat CWD, but also future diseases that might come up, one of which would be bovine tuberculosis. If that became established in our deer herd, it would be devastating to the cattle industry, and so for everybody's interest, it's really important that we can keep, wildlife that cohabit the landscape with livestock as healthy as possible. And we hope that we have kind of all the suite of tools available to do that.
Dr. Bonson, currently deer baiting is banned in, or this bill addressing a ban in the state of North Dakota. What are the consequences or the penalties, rather, for violating that ban? And about how often are you seeing those? Are you seeing that a lot? Or are you not seeing it very much?
Yeah, it's a non-criminal offense. Again, I apologize. I think the fee is $100 or $250, something to that effect. I'll be the first to say that it is a tough thing. It's kind of hard to enforce. So our wardens don't end up writing a lot of tickets around it. But that being said, I do think that most hunters want to do the right thing, and when that restriction is in place, less baiting occurs versus if it wasn't in place. And we also really hope that most hunters, when they kind of understand what we're up against, if they understand the reason behind it, they'll kind of realize the responsibility that we all have in protecting deer, and so they'll follow the regulation. That's not to say that the wording couldn't be continued to be crafted in a more clear-cut way. We're kind of always addressing that language, but yeah, it's like anything, it's an imperfect system.
I feel like part of the motivation for this bill is the insinuation that the Game and Fish Department is being capricious or some way, or being is maybe the Game and Fish doesn't like baiting as a practice, so they're using chronic wasting disease as cover to just crack down on a practice they don't like. I've read, and granted, some of this is coming from Facebook conversations, which admittedly is not the best location for rational discourse. But I mean, can you speak to that? I mean, I think it's important to establish why Game and Fish has this authority, and why you've been exercising it.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great question. I can say that what you'll hear folks in our department say is that we're not in the business of regulating ethics around hunting. We put regulations in place. We set deer licenses around, to the extent that we're able, around biological phenomena. And so that's why we have this. That's why we get involved with baiting. As far as a topic, I can say that. Within our department, even, there's plenty of people, in the eastern part of the state that do bait and enjoy it, and that's fine. Like, there's not alignment within a value system or within a set of values within our department. I can tell you personally, I would like nothing more than to never talk about baiting again. I don't enjoy, I don't enjoy stirring the pot when it comes to this. So. If I could get out of this conversation, I like talking with you two guys, but everybody else, if I didn't have to talk about baiting, that would be great. But frankly, our mission as a department, obligates us to get involved when there's a, established risk that this or any other sort of practice around hunting might present. So, I guess that's what I would rant to you about.
Well, Dr. Bonson, I appreciate your time today coming on and talking about this, and I can understand that people are passionate about hunting, and rightfully so. It's a wonderful tradition, but I think anytime I don't know this bill, it just seems like it seems to me like if you're unhappy with the way that North Dakota Game and Fish is using that authority, then we can have a public debate about it. You have a boss. Your boss has a boss, the governor of the state. There's things that we could talk about. I think just taking away the ability to ever do it because maybe some people don't like the way it's being applied in this specific incident seems like an overreaction. But anyway, that's all we have time for. Dr. Bonson, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate your time, fellas.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chad Kuhl, host of the Northland Outdoors podcast. Hey, here in the Northland, we love our time outside. And on the Northland Outdoors podcast, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just fishing, not just hunting, but mountain biking, camping, rock climbing, bird watching, you name it. We're going to have it on the Northland Outdoors podcast. New episodes every 2 weeks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So look for it and join us on the Northland Outdoors podcast.
Well, having just finished an interview about deer baiting, we're now going to switch to a logical segue into the Fufeng controversy in the city of Grand Forks, which got some clarity, some resolution recently. The Department of the Air Force issuing a letter to North Dakota's two senators, Senator John Hoeven, Senator Kevin Cramer, indicating that they do consider that wet corn milling facility, which has made so many headlines over the last year plus, they do consider it a serious threat. That just came out yesterday. In response to that, state officials, including Governor Burgum, including our guest now, Grand Forks Mayor Brandon Bochenski, have said that they're pulling support for the project and they're stopping it to the extent that they have the power to stop it. They're stopping it. Mayor Bochenski, welcome. I know this has been difficult. This has been a difficult situation. And from the outside looking in, my opinion, the thing that always frustrated me about this was that you were left sort of asked to make a decision about something that you had no capacity to make a decision about, which was, analyzing the potential national security threat of a corn milling plant owned by a Chinese company. I mean, people were asking, at no point could your office have ever provided an analysis like that. You don't have the resources. That's not the city of Grand Forks' job. That frustrated me, and it frustrated me. What was your reaction, I guess, when you got the news? Let's start there.
Well, obviously, waiting 16 months is tough. I think it would have been great had that communication come, a month or two into the project. But that's why we set forth that development agreement, because we knew that was a potential outcome that could happen. And we could take baby steps to the project moving forward because, let's face it, a corn mill economically would really benefit the area. And we're going to keep pushing for those types of projects. So that's not going to stop. It's, it's the China factor was simply the thing that hung over the project from the start. And that's why we set forward a good process, and we followed it to the end. And we finally got that resolution and was able to protect the city, financially in the meantime. So from the start, we expected probably more out of the federal government sooner, but it did come eventually, and we've got some clarity.
Mayor Bochenski, I have a couple questions for you. Right now, Fufeng still owns that over 300-acre plow land. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's correct. And I guess to put a little bit more clarity on that's the interesting part. The federal government, through that CFIUS process, essentially, allowed that transaction to take place. So they do legally own the land now. But the federal government has also asked, essentially for our help to make sure nothing can get built there.
So that begs a question of a bit of a now what, and then I do have a question that I need clarification on. I think it'd be good for listeners to hear. Those 300 acres, those are not in Grand Forks city limits, or are they?
They were right on the edge. They are in city limits now. So that is in an industrial park, industrial area within the city and within our flood protection.
So now that they still own that as part of the transaction, and I believe it's 320 acres, but point being, it's a good chunk. it's a half section of land. You will not, as city council, for your input anyway. I understand you are not the council, but you are the mayor, commission, but you are the mayor. You will not allow them to build anything on that land, or will you put strict requirements around what they can build? What is your plan for what they can do with this? Because you can't force them to sell now. It is their ownership.
Yeah, and that's kind of the predicament. We don't have authority, over, telling a private landowner that they have to get rid of their land. That would have been the federal government. They chose not to do that. So I can't see us giving them a permit to build anything there.
So if they came to you and said, and I'm not saying they are, but just for hypothetical sake, they said, hey, if we can't do that, we'd like to get some economic use out of this. We're going to sell it off to individual home developers. We're going to plot it out. They can build single family homes and a couple strip malls. Would you?
Oh, certainly. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously through this process, the hopes they're going to move the project. Hopefully it goes to a Cargill and ADM, another value-added ag project, because it's in a great area for that. But ultimately, unless there's some movement on the state or some other avenue, they will own the land, and we'll, hopefully that there's a buyer out there that will be looking to purchase it, and then they can, of course, decide what to do. It's the company that owns it, not the land itself, that we're stopping, development from happening on.
That seems like the best case scenario, right? Because I agree with you. A corn milling plant it's great for Grand Forks. It's great for the state of North Dakota. It's great for people in Minnesota, right, who can bring their product across the border possibly too. It's great all the way around. So I guess the best case scenario would be if Fufeng finds, another company that doesn't have, the connections or I guess the problems that Fufeng had that led to this them being a threat. If they could hand it off to another company, the ball's already quite a ways down the field. Somebody else could step in to a good project, I would hope. I mean, that's got to be that. Have you heard anything along those lines that's?
Well, that's the commitment that the senators made, that they're going to be working for that. So I'm imagining they're going to, help pound the pavement and reach out to their contacts and see what can get done there. Ultimately someone will need to purchase that land and decide what to develop there and, come to a price and those particulars. But that is the ideal situation, I would say, at this point.
Mr. Mayor, put us in kind of your shoes in this position for folks that aren't in Grand Forks or haven't been to some of the commission meetings. When did you, as a mayor or as a commission, you're a commission, right? I'm not saying that wrong. You're not council.
You're a city council, yeah.
Council, dang it. You as a council, when did you first reach out to, I understand you probably didn't reach out to CFIUS yourself, but who made the first contact with the Air Force? When was the Air Force reached out to? Because I know this letter's unambiguous. It was sent to Senators Hoeven and Cramer saying this presents a security threat. We do not want this here, please. From someone relatively high up, as you know. When were they asked to become involved in this project? Was it by you? Was it by the federal delegation? What was the timeline there?
So there's two. They're two separate things, the Air Force and then CFIUS. So the Air Force has a seat on our EDC board, which is our local, Regional Economic Development Corporation. So they were aware of the project, in the earlier stages. When it was selected, the first thing that I did was reach out to the wing leadership and say, hey, this project's coming. What do you guys think of it? What do we need? What are we missing? What do we need to look at?
And that was 16 months ago when this first started?
16 months ago. So and they said, well, we'll run it down through OSI, which is Office of Special Investigations. That's what they do. We'll run it higher up the chain, and we'll let you know if something comes down from leadership. This will be a decision that'll come from higher up. So that started 16 months ago, and then there was a question over whether this fell under the CFIUS purview or not, and ultimately we felt like it did. So we asked the company and said, you need to submit to the CFIUS thing if you want this project to move forward, which ultimately they did. And we waited. We had the project on pause while that Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., which is supposed to be the entity that reviews these things and gives a yes or no. And they came back saying, oh, we don't have jurisdiction here. So we'll allow the land purchase to go forward. Yeah.
So specifically, the Air Force's hands were a bit tied by the CFIUS delay in hearing.
I think their hands were tied once the CFIUS review started. So that would have started roughly, let's call it 8 or 9 months after. So that would have been, 8 to 9 months ago. So there was a period of, 2/3 of a year prior to that, before the CFIUS process had started.
16 months ago, when you went to the Air Force and they said, oh, well, we'll send it, run it up the flagpole or send it through our investigations process. Did they ever come back with anything after that?
Yeah, yesterday.
Oh, okay. So finally yesterday, that was the answer. Okay.
So it was a 16-month result that you think might have been, they might have had to have shelved it because of CFIUS, which of course is now which was entirely out of your and the North Dakota federal jurisdiction. Is there any look in retrospect with this process? Was there some capacity for either the city or the federal delegation to do more of a look before you leap or require more of a permitting process before this entity could buy a land plot this big, or what was this literally inevitable?
Well, again, the city doesn't have authority to stop private individuals from the people that owned it. We didn't have the authority to stop them from selling it, and we didn't have the authority to stop Fufeng from buying the land. So from that side, our role really, we took on the vetting role for environmental aspects, traffic, all those things.
Yeah.
So what we can ultimately do to remedy it is just refuse to connect industrial infrastructure, so they can't have a corn mill without water and wastewater, and then deny a building permit.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's the role that we can do. If we were trying to remedy the situation. But as far as the process, like I said before, there's tremendous economic benefit to having $700 million worth of construction in your community, to having higher prices for the corn growers in your area. Jobs, certainly property tax revenue that would have lowered the taxes for. So we felt there was enough benefit to at least have a process that could be stopped if this happened, but we could take those baby steps forward and get a better understanding. And certainly in the meantime, you've only seen the relationship with China deteriorate. I mean, you had a 4-star general last week saying we need to get prepared, and there's going to be a war in 2025, and we should be getting our particulars in order and practicing shooting a target in the head. I mean, that was from 7 meters. I don't know if you guys read that one, but it certainly escalated. Let's just put it that way.
Do you? It seems you mentioned like you guys, City of Grand Forks, you don't have the ability to deny a project because you don't like that it's owned by a Chinese company. I think that's kind of gotten lost here. I mean, you as you should. Your purview is it going to stink? Is there going to be too much traffic? Is it are they following the building codes appropriately? I mean, that's your purview as a local official. I don't want you as a local official to have the authority to say, I consider this to be a national security threat. Getting back to your previous point, how in the world could you analyze that? You don't have the resources. And again, I guess from a local official, I mean, it seems pretty clear to me in the modern era, right, with the digital spying and everything that's possible now that didn't exist 20, 30, 40 years ago. I feel like we need a better system so that the federal government and all the related, whether it's the Air Force or the Department of Defense or whoever it is, can evaluate this and then give a local official like you a thumbs up or a thumbs down on something like this. I feel like our federal government, I thought we had it with CFIUS. It kind of seems like maybe we don't. Did you agree? I mean, it seems like an area where we need reform.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think our senators, our House Rep as well would fully agree. I think the governor would fully agree. I think that would make things a lot easier. I think in the end, some people might agree with you. That's largely out of our purview, but other people would say, the moment you knew that something was Chinese, you should have stepped up and tried to make it harder for them from the very start. I mean, I think that's an argument that a person could make, but at the same time, what's the federal government's stance? I mean, we're the 2 largest economies in the world. It does appear that we're heading towards a conflict. Are we going to, escalate that? Are we trying to cool it off? I mean, what is really the federal level should be having some sort of stance to push this in direction so that we can have a better understanding.
Well, and it's not just China. I mean, in another context, would it be a good idea right now to be allowing a Russian-owned company to be, creating some big development near the Air Force, given what's going on in Ukraine and our involvement in that? I mean, those are valid questions to ask, and they're not questions that can be answered through the local regulatory process. Well,
should they be allowed to have businesses, in general? I mean, should it be 100 miles for a base? Should there be any business that's here now? If Chinese businesses are viewed as a direct arm of the Chinese military, then should there really be any Chinese businesses here? I mean, that's a question that probably needs to get answered.
Because everybody brought up all the time Cirrus Aircraft in Grand Forks is a Chinese owned. Now, I don't want to besmirch there. I'm sure there's fine people that work there. I don't want to create hysteria, but I mean, I think that really speaks to a vacuum here. What are the rules? What are the limitations? I don't think anybody really knows.
Yeah, and I spoke to that, and I said it really leaves open the question. And I even got a call from the university president this morning. He said that there's Chinese students and professors that are really feeling uncomfortable today. He said, I had a statement that said this leaves open the question of Chinese students and Chinese professors at UND. I mean, if this thing was the risk that they say, it'd be hard to understand how serious aircraft and other things, wouldn't be a risk. So some clarity on those things would be good too. And it's made some people, uncomfortable, let's say. And he had to call and communicate that to me. And I said, well, I don't know what else to say. We've got to at least have some stance on that. So that was, what I wrote in there. It leaves open the question as to how we move forward with those entities.
You've had now months of on again, off again contentious council meetings here based around this issue, ranging from probably people that just wouldn't want something to be built there, period, to people who feel it's going to impact the way they can perform their egg operations, to those concerned about resources. There's supposed to be a natural gas line and quite a bit of water use, from my understanding, for the corn plant, and then all the national security issue implications that we've talking about today that the Air Force has now sent you a letter on that we had you on for. Do you think that there's either a more efficient way of going about planning and zoning on a city level here, a way to maybe turn the temperature down a little bit? Because you're also getting yelled at on occasion in the council room. There are folks that are feeling uncomfortable. Or do you think maybe this is just kind of part of the necessary messiness of self-governance and democracy? What's your take on that? Do you see a new way or a different way of doing it?
We did this process as transparent as it could possibly be. We had, at this point, there has been 30, 40, 50 different public meetings where people have got a chance to talk, to ask questions, for us to answer questions, to give feedback. It's going to be messy. These are large projects. They are tough to get from start to finish. You add the China element, it brings it to a whole new level. There's obviously people that were concerned about, environmental, about a whole plethora of different things. In the end, the item that really stuck and was the sticking point was China. The rest we could answer. We could go through our process. We could answer those. We couldn't answer the China question to a definitive level that the Air Force or the federal government can.
Well, one thing, the point you just made about, some of the folks of Asian or Chinese descent or origin, feeling uncomfortable. I mean, that breaks my heart to hear, first of all. I mean, I don't like that at all. But I think that, again, that speaks to a need for a process here, because when you leave as somebody who works in information for a living, right, in sort of mass communication, when you leave a vacuum, people fill it with a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's good. A lot of times it's not. Sometimes it's bigotry. Sometimes it's misinformation. Sometimes it's whatever. And I think that was the real problem here, is we had an information vacuum around this. And some of the people that were opposing this, had some not so great motivations. I think that's reality. And so I guess do you agree? I mean, that's another, I think that speaks to another reason why we need a good process to produce good information that we can make decisions on.
I get the gist of that statement. I would say the vast majority of the people that came and spoke, their heart was in the right place.
Absolutely.
I would say there was a couple that maybe would have delved into that, that area.
I agree with that.
But at the end of the day, I think that's a broader question. It's not necessarily the Chinese people. It's the Chinese government. It's members of this party that makes up 6% of their country. It's kind of shocking that the 94% haven't tried to change that over the last decades, if they've had such issues with it, and you're seeing these protests. But it's, where do you land? And you've got a bad government over there. Where does that leave the people? How do you manage that aspect of it? And I think we've got to be cautious how we do that, because that doesn't speak to what American values are. We need to be protected. We need to have freedom, but our values aren't set up to be against a certain race of people that has nothing to do with what's happening. I just think that's totally wrong. So where is that balance now? That is the question of the day.
Have you heard anything from the Fufeng people? And I mean, have they indicated, I mean, I guess I'm sure they're regrouping, trying to figure out what they want to do. Have you had any indication about what their next steps are?
No, I mean, the phone call was very short. It's just, this is untenable to go forward. And the one question they had, well, does that mean it's over? And yeah, the answer was yes. So I think the response was okay. And some disappointment, I would imagine. I mean, this is a project that the COO had worked on. He's a guy from Detroit that, largely their executive group was all, Americans that had been working on this. So I think there was some disappointment because they put a lot of effort into it, but that's where we're ended.
You're probably sick to death of talking about this, but I think it's well worth educating our listeners on. You said that if you could, you're hoping an ADM or someone else comes in with an egg development project here. There was what was designated to be an egg park, agriculture, like industrial park in the city of Grand Forks. Is that correct? What was the definition around that?
Yep. Yeah. Well, we've already have Simplot. We have Philadelphia macaroni. We've got Red River potatoes. We've got the North Dakota mill and elevator. So we've got.
And they're all in one location, or what's the? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. In the same location. Yeah.
So resource wise, then I know at one point there was supposed to be a natural gas pipeline coming to help fuel this plant, and then water usage was going to be massive. At one point, I heard it was going to be 1-to-1, like city use of residential and commercial use of water versus what Fufeng was going to use. In theory, then, if someone else comes and tries to create a similar milling plant, there would be similar resource development. That's not really to do one way or another with a national security concern, although that's an element there too. But can you speak to, is Grand Forks County City going to be able to, one, supply that much water, and is it going to draw from other ag resources? And two, where are we at with the natural gas pipeline right now?
Yeah, well, the natural gas pipeline will still be, vastly important because we've got Epitome Energy, we got another soybean crushing plant that's coming that's going to be a large gas user, and if a fertilizer plant, which was proposed roughly 10 years ago now, I guess it's been 8 years. If that project comes forward, we're going to need a large gas too. As far as the water, we had a lot of the experts come in and spoke to that. We've got permits for 60 million gallons a day plus. There's on average 1.5 billion gallons a day that flows past the city of Grand Forks. This project would use 6.6 million. That's less than 0.5% of the water that flows by. We don't store the water. It's a river it flows past. If we don't use it, it ends up in the Hudson Bay as salt water. So there's a tremendous amount of water availability. We've got roughly 3 times the water that Fargo has, and we use half of it, a half of the amount that Fargo uses. So we've got 6 times the availability that Fargo does. They continue to grow. The benefit Grand Forks has is our resources, or is our infrastructure. And I think people focused on that as a way to be against it without having to say I'm against it because of China.
So where does the natural gas pipeline stand now, though? So you said the project was proposed 10 years ago. Where is there any kind of permitting or progress construction going on right now, or no?
That was on the fertilizer plant. So on the natural gas pipeline, there's really 2 options that are being looked at. It's the short version would be bring gas from east to west. So from Minnesota on the Viking line to us, the current line, it's only 13 miles. If we're going to go from west to east, you're talking about a multiple 100-mile line, which will take much longer. So that's still being proposed. You're seeing the legislature right now deciding how much money to try to put towards that to make that happen. And that's a huge benefit for the state. If we can sell our gas, use it within our state, add value to products before we ship it out. Plus, you're capped on how much gas you can flare and how much gas that you can produce. And if you aren't using the gas that you produce, you can't pump any more oil. That's a federal requirement. So we're capped on how much oil we can produce, which is a huge resource for the state. And if we can't find natural gas usage within the state, that number is going to drop, and the legacy fund's not going to be growing like it is.
It would be pretty nice to use it too, instead of just having it literally go up in smoke.
We have too much of it in the West, and we have a lot of great ways to use it in the East. So that's a problem we can fix. But one of the great things about the Air Force finally speaking up on this is that it feels like the city of Grand Forks can move on and start talking about. I mean, obviously you could talk and chew gum at the same time, but it feels like all these other great projects, aren't going to be clouded over. We've got clarity on Fufeng. The city of Grand Forks can move on to all this other great stuff.
Well, I would, economic development's a big part of what I do. That's part of what I ran to try to drive, growth in the city. But, realistically, we've got to run an entire city of 600 people, police force, fire department, water, wastewater, streets, sanitation, engineering, inspections, finance. There's a lot of work that we have to do day to day where, economic development takes up 5 or 10% of the time. The rest of it's running a city. That's really been flipped. Some of those things need more attention than they've been able to be given just because of the intense, due diligence process and all the pressure that's been on the city over the last year.
That's, you can have the big picture items, and then every once in a while you got to talk about trash collection because that's important too.
Snow removal's kind of been a big one.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. And nobody ever thinks about that stuff too until their streets stop plowed or their trash didn't get picked up. We just take that stuff for granted. Mayor, I know you're short on time. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the week.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
Okay, just finished our interview with Mayor Bochenski from Grand Forks, and I got to say, Ben, it's a relief to have that done. I'm glad it's done. I wish that the federal government. I mean, to me, that's the big frustrating thing here, and that's the way I always try to think about these things from, I guess, I don't know what you want to call it, like a societal perspective, where if we leave information like we're operating in a very low trust environment, right? There's conspiracy theories, people don't trust their government, et cetera, et cetera.
The conversation isn't nuanced, and it seeks it seeks scandal in order to keep attention on it, and I think everyone's a little bit to blame, but also everyone needs to be a little bit helped along too.
Right, and I mean, so that's the problem when you leave information vacuum. That's why government transparency is important, and I think the city of Grand Forks did a great job on that. Mayor Bochenski said they did their business out in the open. As someone who observed the process, I agree, and that wasn't always very comfortable, right? A lot of times that made some public hearings where things got a little ugly.
And it seemed to me like he didn't take that very personally. I actually brought up the heated council meetings, and he seemed to shrug that off. And I mean that in a good way, like he's handling it, and that's a compliment to him.
Well, and I think his point too, that some of the ugliness is not necessarily representative of the people who are concerned about this. I think a lot of times they draw the most headlines, right? Because they say ugly things or they do ugly things, and that draws attention. But they weren't representing the majority here, the people who felt that way. There were a lot of perfectly valid reasons to be concerned about this project.
That's why I brought up the resource use too, because for folks there, when there's a drought, if you're an egg producer there, if you're trying to use some of the roadways there, some of the production going on, you need to have a conversation about how this is going to directly impact roadways, water resources. These are how people make their living. So it's worth having, and I don't disagree with him that there's transparency with the process. Lord knows we've seen so much of it. My question more to him was, is there a way of doing it that maybe the temperature wouldn't have to be as turned up as this was? And we're North Dakota. By national standards, the temperature wasn't very cranked up. I think this was pretty calm by most standards, but we're so calm in this state. Maybe this was looked at as
we didn't have a situation where somebody threatened to come over the table at the Grand Forks City Council. I don't know if you remember that. It's a guy who founded.
No, I didn't actually. No,
it's a guy who founded the Sons of Liberty out of Tioga.
Wow.
But again, I don't.
Somebody named their group after the second Metal Gear Solid game. I remember playing that on PlayStation 2.
Well, I don't think their point of view is all that representative of the state, but it was very heated, and I think some of the heat came from the perception that the city of Grand Forks was moving forward when we didn't have an answer to the national security problem. And that was amazing to me because he said at the beginning they asked the Air Force to weigh in.
And didn't get a response.
And didn't get a response for 16 months. I mean, at some point, I mean, even if the Air Force needs 16 months, then I think they need to say, listen, put a pin in this, and it's going to take us a while. We'll have you an answer. Or give some sort of a timeline for when they're going to give an answer back.
I'd like to reach out to, and I don't mean to assign you work, but this Andrew P. Hunter, he's the Assistant Secretary, of Air Force for Acquisition Technology and Logistics. He's the one that sent that letter to Senator Hoeven and then a similar one to Senator Cramer, laying out in unambiguous but undetailed terms. This is a national security threat. We do not support this. Please do not let this happen.
Right.
And that really is kind of it. It's 3 paragraphs long. You can read it very quickly. And was that truly the process? Was they waited 16 months to say that? I mean, my God, what if the city council just said, go for it? Well, I mean, they could be partway through building right now. So there's got to be something there.
Which again, I think speaks to the competence with Grand Forks handled this very difficult thing. That was one thing that Mayor Bochenski said, is they were aware that at any time the Air Force could come back and say this. So they put themselves in a position where they were moving very incrementally so that they weren't overcommitted, and when they needed to, they could pull out to the best degree. But I mean, on the other hand, he's got a right. I mean, they're private citizens, including American citizens who are involved in that project. They have a right to develop their land. They have a right to, to be treated under the law. So
they do, and they're certainly, as you point out multiple times, this is not the first time a Chinese company or Chinese owners have come to North Dakota, have bought land and operated and done business here.
Right.
Cirrus Aircraft is one example. Look at the apartment buildings and real estate developments held by Chinese companies in western North Dakota. This is not a new thing.
No, it's not.
Brent Sanford was dealing with this as mayor of Watford City before he was lieutenant governor.
Sure. Yeah, and that's I think the thing to point out in that context is that the world's changed, and I think we are coming to grips with the reality of what sort of espionage is possible in the digital era and how it could be facilitated by this sort of development. And we need a process. I think the federal government's behind the curve. We need a process through which people who have the right information, who are in the know at the federal level, because it's the federal government's job to regulate our relationships with other countries, not the Grand Forks City Council or even the state of North Dakota. It's the federal government's job. We need a process through which they can assure, whether it's Chinese or Russian or Korea or whoever it is,
anyone who might be a threat. No,
that we could say thumbs up, thumbs down.
I thought your point about the UND was that department head, or was it just a professor who was speaking to
the university
international students?
So the mayor said that the president of the University of North Dakota, Andrea Armacost, called him and said that he had some faculty and some students who were feeling uncomfortable today because of what happened, and I think probably he was telling the mayor to keep that in mind as we all talk about this. And I think rightfully so, that we want to be sensitive and make it clear the problem is not our Chinese friends and neighbors and students and people who are, whether they're citizens or not. It's the problem's not them. The problem, unfortunately, is the government of China right now. And we need to be very clear in how we talk about that.
It's incredibly important that in any case dealing with any kind of international issues, or just in general, it's a good principle to never confuse a people with their government, because in many cases, and certainly in China's case, they were not actively able to choose their government. They could very potentially not approve of things that the government is trying to do. And I take the president of UND, I'm getting it third person, or I'm getting it secondhand, but his point makes a lot of sense. And the mayor just said, we have to have a policy here. I think some reassurance is warranted there, because again, we don't want to feed into what you guys are saying, just a more negative base prejudging element here that I don't think anyone having economic development conversations, national security conversations is having with these students, because unfortunately, whenever you get into this, there's this element there that says, well, we just shouldn't have any exchange students. We just shouldn't have any interaction or touch base with any one or any other culture from any other country. And it's not how we exert soft power. It's not how we interact with the global economy. We shouldn't want
that. Americans should be able, Americans should be able to avail themselves, if they find a product that's made by a foreign country or somebody else, they should be able to avail themselves of that. That's part of what freedom means, is not just the freedom to buy domestically, but to buy internationally. I think it's one of the great achievements, frankly, of capitalism, that I could go to at a store in the smallest city in North Dakota and browse from among products made all over the world. That's a pretty amazing thing. And I realize that's not a fashionable point of view these days, where everybody's kind of turned their backs on globalism. I don't want to turn my back on globalism. I do want us to go forward in a way that recognizes the very sophisticated, the very modern threat that countries like Russia and China, I mean, listen, we know Russia has tried. We can debate about whether or not they've ever been successful, but we know they've tried to meddle in our elections. They're continuing to try to meddle in our elections. We know the Iranians just tried to pull off an assassination in Brooklyn not that long ago, using the Russian mob. They tried to assassinate a political dissenter from Iran that's living there. We know that the Russians have tried to assassinate people. We know that China's trying to spy on us all the time, and probably is effective in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So,
and we could go on. Saudi Arabia's relationship with some journalists, with journalists, and assassination.
That's the world we're living in
there, and so there are bad actors, and we need to have a sophisticated and efficient way of screening those at the federal level. It's clearly, to me, if I'm a member of the federal delegation, there's a very clear axe to grind. Like, start having committee hearings. You have, I was going to say the power of the gavel. Maybe they don't have the gavel, but you have the ability to call these things in. You have now a headline grabbing example from your home turf if you're Representative Armstrong or Senators Cramer or Hoeven.
So I think the first question is, Cepheus, what did you need to be able to do this? Do you need the law to change? Do you need to be given some jurisdiction? I mean, they said they don't have jurisdiction. I don't know if I agree with that, but they punted. So, and like to your point, does Cepheus need to be dissolved and the law rewritten and replaced with something else? And
do they need to be significantly reformed? I'd be interested in hearing from them, because I wonder, because in my limited experience in government on a much lower non-national
I had never heard of Cepheus before this. Let me put it that way.
But in my experience, in my brief time being a state representative, what you can hear a lot of times is very well-meaning folks from Cepheus will come up and say, well, actually, we've been saying for years we need items 1, 2, and 3. We've been saying for the last 30 years, and every time the result is this, and every time we say that, they close their ears and they walk away. And this is the result. So that now you need to change it because you hold the power of the purse string. That's why. So I'm saying the federal delegation's got to start grinding that axe and start making it very public and making some noise. Because somewhere the daylight will show that the process is never going to be perfect, but clearly it's a little too far away from perfect right now.
Clearly. And again, information vacuums are dangerous. Let's put it in another context. Let's talk about law enforcement, right? Every time in the past when there have been incidents of police brutality or violence between police and pride, because sometimes violence is justified, although in most of these cases I've been making headlines, it sure was brutal and terrible. But in the practice, the law enforcement, they wouldn't release the video right away, and they would sit on a lot of information and say, oh, it's under investigation, we can't release it now. And I would argue that in that information vacuum, that hurt the trust between people and law enforcement. Now, of course, a lot of times when they're releasing the information, that you releasing the video or something, that's not helping either, because it's showing, in some of these cases, police doing terrible things. But
in those individual instances, if the footage is damning, well, then the thing that was actually done was damning. The footage is simply documentation. If it's not being manipulated, if it's not being changed around, and there's individual incidents have individual nuances, but if the fact that the cover-up is just there because the thing that was being done was damnable, well, then it should be exposed. That information vacuum does need to be opened.
This is why government, and let me put on my journalist hat, this is why government transparency matters. Because if people lose faith in their institutions, or if they feel like their institutions are going to hide things or sit on things or whatever, then what's the point? And I really think Mayor Bochenski, I know a lot of people were coming down on Mayor Bochenski and it's like, oh, he's pro-China, and they were saying all these things about him. I think he was a local official who saw an economic project that he felt would be a boon to his community, and he was working with them through the project, and he had no say over the national security implications.
Shoot, though, you do bring up something I meant to ask the mayor and I forgot to, which is I did want to know how much money the city had spent on prepping this, because I know they had some studies done, and that really is taxpayer dollars, because there's just this element to me of needing to look before you leap. I know it's kind of like the FDA conundrum. Everyone says it takes way too long to approve drugs. Also, there are way too many dangerous drugs the FDA approves, and they approve them way too fast. And and it depends on which drug, it depends on which instance. And it's the same thing with the city and county planning and zoning approvals, what goes in where, because there's plenty of people that will say, you put this in too fast, you didn't listen to me, I didn't have a chance to hear it. And I hear what he's saying about transparency there, but maybe there's I don't know, for some of these sometimes, if you're going to have a press conference.
The way we have begun doing, and that toothpaste is out of the tube, there's no going back. The way we do economic development, when we're asking the government to invest in different ways. I mean, sometimes the investment is just we're going to agree to a tax abatement, or we're gonna give a low interest or a special loan or something out of an economic development fund. Sometimes it's just that. Sometimes it's literal investments where we're talking about investing, using the legacy fund to invest in companies here in North Dakota. When you go down that road and you say that's a policy that we want to pursue, you have to accept that there's some risk to it. You have to accept that at some point, well-meaning people are going to sometimes pick losers. Nobody gets 100% return on their investments. Nobody picks investments 100% right 100% of the time. So, I mean, I think your caution, look before you leap. I think that's right. But also on the other side of that, you got to accept sometimes we're going to pick losers.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone's too, yeah, no, I agree with you here. Anything you're tracking as far as the legislature goes? I got a couple. I wanted to highlight a couple positive bills for once.
Let's do it.
My constant tuttery.
And let's do it. Yeah, I am a notorious cynic. So.
Well, I liked the school lunch bills that Representative Ista and Representative Lori Beth Hager are from Grand Forks and Fargo respectively are putting into the legislature. Both do have bipartisan support, and the issue there was during COVID or whatever you want to call the pandemic period, there was some ARPA funds, federal government funds that covered some school lunch programs. I've spoken to a couple of local school board members and a former Bismarck school board member who have told me that there simply wasn't the budget in their school program to cover every, like those meals there. And when we say cover meals, we're not talking about buying a 3-course meal for everyone else. But what has been happening is there's this weird distinguishing between the kids that, yes, parents do have to pay in or someone has to make somebody whole, but there was this kind of means of calling them out or like separating them out, saying you're getting this lunch or you're not graduating until you pay off this debt.
You're just gonna get a peanut butter sandwich, and then everybody say, he got the poor kid's lunch.
But this stopping kids from graduating, it's like, okay, this kid's going to school, showing up every day, getting there however they can. For the most of your school career, you're not driving yourself, and then you're graduating and you say you're going to hold them back off of a $700 lunch fee. Wouldn't you rather have them have a high school diploma and be able to go on and earn much more money and become a much more productive person able to earn? I just think the state should clearly be covering this, and I think it's a positive move that seems to be getting a lot of support.
A school lunch. First of all, school lunch can be expensive. I think people don't understand when you're paying for it. It
absolutely can be.
I have 2 kids in school now. And I mean, it's $150 a month sometimes. It's not. It's a not insignificant expense. I used to, I was very much in the like personal responsibility thing. Like you had the kids, they cost money. Pay what you owe. I've come around a little bit, and because we're having so many problems with obviously, I don't want to make kids feel bad or disadvantage kids in some way in the public school system.
And what you're saying is because their parents, the person responsible, but the kids, why should the kid not graduate?
I mean, if the parents are irresponsible, why are we punishing the kids? It's not the kids' fault. They don't get to choose who their parents are. And so I guess what I've come around is school's compulsory, right? You're required to go to school, right? The public schools have to take everybody. And so I don't know. I've come to believe that it's a little silly to carve out this one expense of school, because the kids got to eat during the day, to carve out this one expense of K through 12 education and make it like a direct bill situation, as opposed to maybe we just need to understand that school lunch is a part of the cost of operating public schools, build it into the school budgets, and move on.
Well, let's be clear here too. There's a buy in bulk principle that none of this food is being bought individually. We're buying massive Sam's Club, Costco amounts to
sunk cost.
Any school cafeteria. How much cost is there of keeping track and tracking down the parents who aren't paying and labeling these other kids and the time spent on it?
Enforcing and bill collecting and everything else. Yeah.
Just make it simple. Make it simple. Have them graduate. Get them to the point where they have a high school diploma and can get out the door, go to a trade school, get their first job, join the military.
Here's the thing. We're
still
to
college. One of those things. But holding them back from this based on this dumb bureaucratic thing is silliness.
The taxpayers are still paying for it. I mean, whether you pay it in the form of the school lunch bill you get from your school, or you're paying it as a part of your property taxes or your state income taxes, et cetera, you're paying for it. So
And I'm glad to see competing bills for something positive for once, instead of a lot of hot button social issue bills I've been looking at that have 20 versions of it.
Yeah. I think that's a real good thing. I think we've had some other positive developments. The Attorney General backed off his call to move the crime lab under BCI. Yep. I feel like there were some very positive amendments made to Senator Hoag's mandatory minimum bill. I feel like it got reformed. It ended up passing through the Senate. There were some reforms. I think that got turned into a very good bill. So that was nice to see. But hey, we're up against it. We've used all our time for today. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back again next week. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.